Imagine spending 3 years restoring your late father's boat, sanding, polishing, rebuilding it piece by piece, only to wake up one morning and find it torched to ashes. And the kicker? It wasn't random vandals. Nope. It was your own HOA, trying to scare you into submission. Well, buckle up, because this story isn't just about a boat fire. It's about a retired Coast Guard veteran who flipped the script, froze the HOA's bank accounts, and dismantled their empire brick by brick. Welcome to the Saga of Emerald Shores. They torched my boat, so I torched their entire HOA. Let's break it down in 10 explosive facts. Before the HOA wars boiled over, before the lawyers, the frozen bank accounts, and the spectacular implosion of Emerald Shores' so-called governing body, it all came down to a boat. Not just any boat, but the boat, a 1987 Morgan Out Island sailboat christened the Horizon Runner. Now, let's be clear. This wasn't some plastic toy or weekend runabout you buy at a discount marina. This was legacy. Garrett Holloway's father, a man who believed in hard work, sea air, and passing something meaningful down the bloodline, had spent years painstakingly restoring it. Every plank of wood sanded, every inch of fiberglass buffed, every brass fitting polished until it gleamed. For him, it was a project of love. For Garrett, after his father passed from cancer, it became a living memory. Fast forward, Garrett, a retired Coast Guard veteran with salt water in his veins and the patience of a saint, made it his mission to keep that boat afloat. Docked at his lakeside home in Emerald Shores, the Horizon Runner wasn't just a vessel. It was history, heritage, and therapy. For a man who'd seen storms at sea and storms in life, casting off with his father's boat was peace itself. But peace doesn't sit well with people like Darlene Whitaker, the HOA president of Emerald Shores. Darlene wasn't just nosy, she was power drunk. Picture pastel blazers, oversized sunglasses, and a permanent expression of disapproval that could curdle milk. Her obsession? Rules. Her weapon? Fines. Her hobby? Making other people's lives miserable under the banner of protecting property values. And when Darlene saw Garrett's dock and his prized Horizon Runner, she didn't see legacy or heritage. She saw non-compliance. She saw something she couldn't control. She saw an opportunity to flex her HOA muscles and remind the neighborhood who wore the crown. What started small, nasty letters stuffed in Garrett's mailbox, petty citations for dock violations, threats of fines that stacked faster than interest on a payday loan, escalated quickly. Garrett ignored her because men who've weathered hurricanes don't flinch at strongly worded HOA letters. But Darlene wasn't used to being ignored. And when tyrants aren't obeyed, they escalate. One night, Garrett was woken by the crackle of fire. Not the cozy kind in a fireplace, but the violent, heart-stopping roar of flames devouring wood and fiberglass. By the time he rushed down barefoot and panicked, the Horizon Runner was ablaze. Fire licked the night sky, sparks raining like hellfire, neighbors spilling out in horror as Garrett's father's legacy collapsed into blackened ash. The fire department arrived, but it was too late. The boat was gone. At first glance, it looked like a tragedy. But if you've ever watched a man lose something sacred, you know what comes next. That night didn't break Garrett. It forged him. The HOA thought they could intimidate him. They thought they could torch his past and silence his resistance. What they really did was light a fuse. Because Garrett wasn't just a homeowner. He was a Coast Guard veteran with grit in his veins, discipline in his bones, and a stubborn refusal to bow to bullies. The HOA thought the Horizon Runner's ashes were their victory. In reality, they were the spark that ignited their downfall. If you thought burning a man's boat would scare him off, think again. Because what Garrett did next didn't just scare the HOA, it turned into financial Armageddon. Welcome to fact number 2, how freezing a bank account sank an entire empire. If the HOA thought torching Garrett's boat was their power move, they clearly forgot one thing. Never pick a fight with a man who spent his career in the Coast Guard navigating bureaucracy thicker than molasses. Garrett wasn't just tough.
He was strategic. And while Darlene and her bored cronies thought they'd broken his spirit, Garrett was quietly sharpening his sword. Spoiler alert, it came in the form of freezing their lifeline, the HOA's bank accounts. Here's how it went down. After the fire, most people would have folded, mourned the loss, moved on. But Garrett wasn't wired that way. Instead, he started connecting dots. HOA threatening letters, escalating fines, boat violations, and now, conveniently, the boat reduced to ashes. Coincidence? Please. Garrett had served long enough to know when he was looking at an intimidation tactic dressed up as compliance. So he got to work. Step 1, the HOA's financials. Every HOA, no matter how smug their president looks in a pastel blazer, needs money to operate. Dues, fines, special assessments all funnel into an account they guard like a dragon hoarding gold. Without that cash flow, they can't enforce rules, can't hire lawyers, can't plaster the neighborhood with no fishing signs. And Garrett knew it. He didn't go charging in guns blazing. No, he pulled records, dug through bylaws, researched incorporation documents. What he found made his jaw tighten, but his heart grin. Sloppy accounting, missing paperwork, and a board that treated the HOA account like their personal piggy bank. Darlene had been cutting checks for landscaping contracts that didn't exist, filing maintenance expenses that never happened, and quietly siphoning off funds with all the subtlety of a toddler stealing cookies. Armed with evidence, Garrett called in reinforcements. His lawyer, a sharp-as-a-tack bulldog named Rebecca Lawson. Rebecca didn't just dabble in HOA disputes, she ate HOAs for breakfast. Together, they pieced the puzzle. Missing financial reports? Check. Illegal use of funds? Double check. Violations of state nonprofit law? Jackpot. Then came the killer move. Rebecca filed motions with the county court to freeze the HOA's bank accounts pending investigation. Picture Darlene logging in one morning to pay a contractor, read her cousin's lawn care side hustle, only to find the balance locked tighter than Fort Knox. No payments in, no payments out. The HOA's mighty war chest paralyzed. Neighbors started noticing immediately. No more violation letters flooding their mailboxes, no threats of liens for slightly faded shutters, no smug HOA board meetings with catered snacks and condescending lectures about community standards. The machine had ground to a halt, and Garrett was the one who pulled the plug. The psychological effect was delicious. For years, Darlene's power came from that money. It gave her teeth. Without it, she was just another neighbor, only now she was a neighbor with an angry mob realizing their dues had been misused. Imagine explaining to your community why you can't afford streetlight maintenance but somehow manage to buy yourself a new golf cart. Spoiler, it didn't go over well. So, fact number 2 isn't just about freezing bank accounts. It's about cutting the head off the HOA Hydra. Garrett didn't swing wildly at the beast. He went straight for the jugular. By taking away their money, he didn't just slow them down, he disarmed them completely. And if you think losing access to their war chest left Darlene embarrassed, oh no, because what Garrett uncovered next wasn't just bad bookkeeping, it was full-blown embezzlement. Welcome to fact number 3, the financial skeletons in the HOA's closet. Freezing the HOA's bank accounts was like pulling the fire alarm at a corrupt casino. Suddenly, all the shady deals and backroom shenanigans were dragged into daylight. And Garrett, he wasn't just content with locking their money away, he wanted to know exactly what those funds had been feeding. Spoiler alert, the skeletons in the HOA's closet weren't just dusty, they were downright rancid. Once the court freeze went into effect, Rebecca, Garrett's pit bull attorney, filed motions for a forensic audit. Now, if you've never seen a forensic accountant at work, picture Sherlock Holmes with spreadsheets instead of a magnifying glass. Every missing receipt, every suspicious transfer, every landscaping expense that smelled like 3-day-old fish, these people can spot it. And oh boy, did they. First up, landscaping contracts. On paper, Emerald Shores HOA had been paying Whitaker Lawn and Garden thousands of dollars every quarter for grounds maintenance.
Sounds normal, right? Except Whitaker Lawn and Garden didn't exist. There was no business license, no equipment, no workers. Just Darlene's nephew pocketing checks in exchange for occasionally mowing her yard. Second, community event funds. According to HOA records, Emerald Shores hosted quarterly community socials with catered meals and entertainment. Except nobody in the neighborhood could remember attending a single one. No banners, no food, no gatherings, just invoices signed by Darlene funneled straight into a shell account. And the pièce de résistance, personal expenses disguised as HOA operations, gas receipts, grocery bills, even a suspicious charge at a high-end spa downtown, all coded as board development. Because apparently in Darlene's world, a cucumber facial counts as essential HOA business. Neighbors were furious. They'd been paying their dues faithfully, thinking it was funding common area repairs, road maintenance, maybe some lake upkeep. Instead, it was financing Darlene's mani-pedis and her nephew's gas money. Garrett made sure the findings weren't just buried in legal paperwork. He shared them. Copies of the audits circulated faster than gossip at a church potluck. Suddenly, the neighborhood wasn't just annoyed at the HOA, they were enraged. The board, once smug and untouchable, started unraveling. Treasurer skipped meetings. Secretary resigned for personal reasons. Even a few of Darlene's loyal lapdogs began distancing themselves, mumbling about not being aware of the details. Classic rats fleeing a sinking ship. But the best part was watching Darlene's reaction. She'd spent years weaponizing compliance, humiliating residents with letters and fines. Now she was the one being humiliated, her little empire exposed as nothing more than a money laundering side hustle with a neighborhood newsletter. And while Garrett never shouted, never gloated, never rubbed her face in it, his quiet presence at every meeting said everything. I see you, and I'm not done. Because freezing the accounts was step 1. Exposing the fraud was step 2. And Garrett wasn't about to stop halfway. He'd lit the fuse, and the blast radius was only widening. So fact number 3 isn't just about money. It's about betrayal. The realization that the HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood, it was exploiting it. And the irony, their intimidation tactic, torching Garrett's boat, had backfired so spectacularly that it unleashed the one man who could, and would, tear their operation down brick by brick. And if you think the audit was bad, just wait until you hear what happened when the HOA tried to fight back with their favorite weapon, lawyers. Because Garrett wasn't just ready, he was 3 steps ahead. Welcome to fact number 4, the legal crossfire. By now, Emerald Shores HOA board looked less like a governing body and more like a sitcom cast spiraling toward cancellation. Their bank accounts were frozen, their shady spending was on full display, and the neighbors were furious. So what did they do? They played their favorite card. Lawyers. If you've dealt with an HOA before, you know the drill. They love their legal threats. Big envelopes stamped with official notice, pages dripping with jargon like non-compliance, remedy, and lien. It's their bread and butter. Their whole power play depends on the fact that most homeowners don't have the time, money, or stomach to fight back. But Garrett? Garrett was a retired Coast Guard officer. The man had spent years facing down hurricanes, bureaucracy, and bureaucrats who thought lost at sea was just another checkbox. A couple of HOA lawyers weren't going to scare him. The HOA hired a firm downtown. Sleek suits, expensive watches, the kind of people who bill you $300 just to say good morning. Their plan was simple. Bury Garrett in paperwork. Motion after motion, threats of countersuits, claims that he was defaming the board by sharing audit results. In their minds, they'd drown him under a tidal wave of legalese until he begged for mercy. Except Garrett had an ace up his sleeve. Rebecca Lawson, remember her? The attorney who specialized in dismantling HOAs for fun? Yeah, she ate these kinds of cases alive. Where Darlene's attorneys sent bluster, Rebecca sent precision strikes. They filed a motion claiming defamation. Rebecca countered with evidence of fraud and harassment. They demanded damages. Rebecca filed for sanctions, citing frivolous lawsuits and abuse of process. It was like watching someone bring a Nerf gun to a duel, only to realize the other guy's holding a howitzer. Court hearings turned into theater. On one side, the HOA lawyers puffed their chests, waving stacks of paper like confetti. On the other, Rebecca calmly presented documents, receipts, and sworn testimony from neighbors. Every time they tried to twist the narrative, she snapped it back with cold, hard facts. And Garrett? He just sat there, quiet and steady, the kind of presence that screamed, "I've seen worse storms than you people." The HOA's problem was simple. They had no case. They couldn't explain away the fake landscaping contracts. They couldn't justify thousands in event spending when the neighborhood had never seen a single balloon. And they sure couldn't explain how burning Garrett's boat coincided so neatly with their attempts to fine him into submission. Every legal arrow they fired ricocheted right back into their own feet. The judge saw it too. At one point, after yet another weak motion from the HOA side, the judge actually sighed and said, "Counsel, this is bordering on harassment." That's judge speak for, "You're wasting everyone's time." Meanwhile, the neighbors, many of whom showed up to hearings just for the drama, were eating popcorn in the back rows. The same people who once lived in fear of Darlene's violation letters were now watching her squirm in court, powerless and exposed. Garrett had flipped the script so completely that the HOA wasn't the neighborhood's enforcer anymore. They were the punchline. So fact number 5 isn't just about legal battles. It's about dismantling intimidation. The HOA tried to weaponize lawyers, the same way they'd weaponized rules and fines. But Garrett turned their own playbook against them by meeting them in court with facts, patience, and an attorney who knew their every trick. He turned their threats into confetti and left them holding the bag. And if you think being humiliated in court was the worst of it, hang on, because the next domino to fall wasn't just legal, it was criminal. Welcome to fact number 5. When the sheriff came knocking. Up until this point, the battle between Garrett and the Emerald Shores HOA was civil war in the courtroom. Bank accounts frozen, finances exposed, lawyers clashing like gladiators with briefcases. But as every true crime fan knows, when enough fraud and intimidation stack up, the civil side gives way to the criminal side. And in Emerald Shores, that shift came with a knock at the door. Picture it. A Tuesday morning. Darlene Whitaker, queen of laminated notices and pastel blazers, was sipping her third iced latte of the day, probably scrolling Zillow for neighborhoods she could ruin next. Suddenly, her perfect little bubble popped. A county sheriff and 2 deputies pulled up in cruisers, badges gleaming in the Florida sun. They weren't there for coffee. They weren't there for chit-chat. They were there because the HOA's antics had officially crossed the line from shady to straight-up criminal. See, Garrett and Rebecca hadn't just uncovered sloppy accounting. They found evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and what prosecutors like to call willful misappropriation of funds. Translation? Stealing. Cold, hard stealing. And when you're the president of an HOA, using neighborhood dues as your personal slush fund is like waving a red cape in front of the law. It's not just immoral, it's illegal. The sheriff's office had questions, a lot of them, about missing receipts, about non-existent landscaping companies, about why community dues were paying for luxury spa treatments and golf carts. And most importantly, about that little boat fire. Yep, you heard that right. The investigation into the torched Horizon Runner wasn't shelved. It was very much alive. Neighbors had whispered, security cameras had picked up suspicious activity, and the timing? Too perfect to be coincidence. The sheriff wasn't saying the HOA did it, but let's just say Darlene's name was suddenly being tossed around in conversations that included the words arson investigation. Neighbors, once terrified of the HOA, were now rallying to tell their stories. Betty from down the street testified about harassment letters. Frank, the retired firefighter, spoke about how the HOA blocked his repairs. People came forward with copies of fines, threats, and receipts. The picture that emerged wasn't of a community improvement organization. It was a shakedown operation with pastel-colored stationery. And here's the delicious irony. The very power Darlene had used to intimidate people, her HOA presidency, was now the noose tightening around her neck. The sheriff didn't care about her fancy titles or her laminated rules. They cared about where the money went. And according to the audit, it went straight into her pocket. Garrett didn't gloat when the cruisers rolled in. He didn't need to. His quiet satisfaction came from watching the very system the HOA abused finally turn on them. For years, residents had lived under the threat of liens and fines. Now, it was Darlene facing penalties, and not the $50 a day kind. We're talking the kind with court dates and orange jumpsuits. So fact number 5 isn't just about a sheriff knocking on doors. It's about accountability finally arriving in a patrol car. The HOA could dodge angry neighbors, they could bluff with lawyers, but they couldn't outrun the law. And for once, justice wasn't written in HOA bylaws, it was written on official county letterhead. And if you think criminal investigators poking around had Darlene sweating, just wait. Because the HOA's house of cards didn't just collapse in the courtroom or under a sheriff's glare, it came crashing down at the ballot box. Welcome to fact number 6, the neighborhood revolt.
For years, Darlene Whitaker ruled Emerald Shores like it was her personal kingdom. Neighbors whispered about her, dreaded her letters, and paid her fines just to avoid the headache. But the thing about tyrants? They only stay in power until the people realize they don't have to play along anymore. And thanks to Garrett, that light bulb finally clicked on across the entire community. The frozen accounts had stopped the HOA's bullying machine. The audit had revealed the fraud. The sheriff had started sniffing around. By this point, even the most HOA-fearing residents were ready to grab their pitchforks. Well, metaphorical ones, because this wasn't an angry mob. This was suburban Florida. Their weapons of choice were petitions, ballots, and barbecue spatulas. Garrett, though never seeking the spotlight, became a quiet rallying point. He wasn't knocking on doors, but his story spread like wildfire. People who'd been fined for everything from mailbox paint to garden flags started comparing notes. Betty's too many lawn gnomes, Frank's unsightly firewood pile, Maria's Christmas lights that lingered past January 6th. One by one, residents began realizing this wasn't community management, this was harassment dressed in khakis. So when the HOA announced elections, the stage was set. And let me tell you, that annual meeting looked less like a community gathering and more like the French Revolution with folding chairs. Neighbors packed the clubhouse. People who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up, arms crossed, eyes blazing. Darlene strutted in like nothing was wrong, pastel blazer, oversized binder, the whole queen bee act. She probably thought she could bluff her way through with speeches about protecting property values and maintaining community standards. But this time, the crowd wasn't buying it. Garrett didn't even need to say much. He simply sat near the front, calm and steady, his presence a reminder of the frozen bank accounts and the audit receipts. When residents started voicing concerns, it was like a dam breaking. One neighbor stood up, demanding to know where their dues had gone. Another demanded transparency. Someone else waved copies of the audit like a smoking gun. And then came the kicker. A petition to remove Darlene and the entire board. The vote wasn't even close. Years of resentment, fueled by Garrett's quiet war, had boiled over into a landslide. Darlene, once untouchable, was ousted in a single night. Her allies? Gone too! For the first time in decades, Emerald Shores had a clean slate. The new board wasn't made up of power-hungry clipboard warriors. It was made up of people who actually lived there, actually cared about the neighborhood, and, get this, actually listened to their neighbors.
No more fines for garden gnomes, no more threats over fishing, no more boat intimidation. The neighborhood wasn't just free, it was alive again. And when Garrett was asked if he'd join the board, he just smiled. He didn't need a title to make a difference. His victory wasn't about sitting in the president's chair. It was about watching his community reclaim itself from the jaws of tyranny. So, fact number 7 isn't just about a neighborhood revolt. It's about what happens when ordinary people realize their power. The HOA thrived on fear and silence, but once residents stood together, the entire rotten structure crumbled in a single vote. And if you think Darlene slinking out of the clubhouse in defeat was the end, think again, because what followed wasn't just political, it was personal. Welcome to fact number 7, the petty revenge of a fallen HOA queen.
If you thought Darlene Whitaker was going to accept her defeat gracefully, smile, shake hands, maybe plant some begonias to keep herself busy, then you've clearly never met an HOA Karen who's just been dethroned. Because instead of bowing out quietly, she decided to go full scorched earth mode. And let's just say it was less community leader and more soap opera villain audition tape. The night of the vote, Darlene stormed out of the clubhouse with all the dignity of a toddler denied candy. Neighbors described it as a walk of shame in pastels. But the next morning, everyone discovered that losing power hadn't stopped her obsession. Nope, if she couldn't control the neighborhood through the HOA, she was going to try from the shadows. First came the flyers. Oh yes, cheaply printed rants on neon paper plastered to mailboxes, fences, even taped to stop signs. The kind of material you'd expect from a conspiracy theorist, not a former HOA president. They accused Garrett of fabricating the audit, claimed the sheriff's visits were routine, and warned that without her leadership, property values would plummet faster than a lead anchor. Spoiler, no one bought it. In fact, most people laughed and used the flyers as fire starters for their backyard barbecues. Next, she tried intimidation. Darlene took to lurking around the lake path, arms crossed, sunglasses on, muttering under her breath whenever Garrett walked by. Neighbors caught her snapping pictures of people's yards like she was still issuing violations. At one point, she even called animal control on Betty's golden retriever, claiming it was unleashed and menacing. Menacing? But it was literally wearing a bandana and carrying a stick in his mouth. The animal control officer gave him treats and left. But the real piece de la resistance came when Darlene tried her hand at legal revenge. She filed what lawyers lovingly call a nuisance lawsuit, claiming Garrett had defamed her reputation by exposing the HOA's financial skeletons. Her evidence? The audit, which, awkward detail, was filed with the court and verified by a licensed forensic accountant. The case lasted about as long as a snowball in Florida. The judge tossed it, and Darlene was slapped with court costs. Instead of rallying support, every petty move just backfired. The flyers made her look unhinged. The intimidation made her look desperate. The failed lawsuit made her look foolish. And through it all, Garrett never flinched. He didn't retaliate, didn't rise to her bait, didn't so much as raise his voice. He just lived his life, calm and steady, while Darlene spun herself into irrelevance. Neighbors who once tiptoed around her now openly mocked her. Someone even put a plastic lawn flamingo in their yard with a sign that read, "Not HOA approved." It became the unofficial mascot of Emerald Shores' new era, bright, tacky, and free. So fact number 7 isn't just about Darlene's downfall, it's about the final unraveling of a woman who built her identity on controlling others. Stripped of her title, stripped of her influence, all she had left was bitterness. And the community wasn't buying what she was selling.
If you've been following the roller coaster so far, you already know Emerald Shores HOA was broke, humiliated, and leaderless. But the true knockout punch didn't come from Garrett's frozen bank accounts or the sheriff's badge. Nope, it came from something every HOA dreads: insurance claims. Because when your neighborhood reputation burns as fast as Garrett's boat, guess who comes knocking? the people who cut the checks. See, when Garrett's Horizon Runner went up in flames, it wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a liability nightmare. Garrett's insurance company launched its own investigation. And unlike the HOA, which thrived on smoke and mirrors, insurance adjusters deal in cold, hard numbers. They don't care about property values or pastel blazers. They care about who's on the hook for paying out tens of thousands of dollars in damages. Now here's the kicker. Garrett's legal team pushed the narrative that the HOA bore responsibility. Between the threats, the harassment, and the timing of the fire, they made a strong case that this wasn't some random act of vandalism. It was intimidation, which meant if the HOA was even partially culpable, their liability insurance had to cover the damages, and those damages weren't small. We're talking replacement cost of a fully restored 40-foot sailboat. Translation? Big bucks. The HOA's insurer balked at first because, of course they did. They argued, they delayed, they sent their own adjusters, but the audit, the complaints, and the sheriff's inquiries painted a picture too ugly to ignore. Eventually, the insurer cut a check to Garrett that not only covered the Horizon Runner, but also tacked on damages for stress, harassment, and legal fees. In other words, Darlene's HOA funded the very man they tried to break. And here's where it gets even sweeter. When an insurance company pays out like that, they don't just shrug and walk away. They turn around and raise premiums, or worse, drop coverage entirely. For Emerald Shores HOA, the payout was a financial nuke. Their premiums skyrocketed to the point where operating was nearly impossible. Some insurers flat out refused to touch them, citing reputational risk. Imagine being so messy that even insurance companies, who literally exist to deal with disasters, won't take your calls. The fallout was immediate. Without affordable insurance, the HOA couldn't legally operate. No insurance meant no ability to enforce liens, no coverage for common areas, no protection against lawsuits. They were like a knight stripped of armor, technically still standing, but one swing away from total collapse. And collapse they did. Residents who'd once begrudgingly paid dues now openly refused. "What are you going to do, fine me?" they laughed. With no insurance safety net, the HOA's power was gone. By the time the dust settled, the organization was flatlined, a hollow shell with no teeth, no funds, and no future. For Garrett, it was poetic justice. The very structure designed to bleed him dry ended up paying for his losses. And while no amount of money could replace the memories tied to the Horizon Runner, the payout represented something more: accountability. Proved that when bullies push too far, the system can, just sometimes, snap back and make things right. So fact number 8 isn't just about money changing hands. It's about leverage. The HOA tried to use finances to control Garrett. In the end, finances destroyed them. Their war chest had been frozen. Their insurance bled them dry. Their empire collapsed not with a bang, but with a bounced check. And if you think an insurance payout was the grand finale, hang tight, because the next chapter wasn't about lawyers or money, it was about legacy. Welcome to fact number 9, how Garrett's victory transformed the community.
By the time the dust settled, the Emerald Shores HOA was basically a ghost ship. The accounts were frozen, the fraud was exposed, the sheriff was circling, the insurance companies had pulled the rug, and Darlene was licking her wounds somewhere far away from a pastel blazer rack. But the real story wasn't about what collapsed. It was about what rose from the rubble. Because Garrett's victory didn't just end an HOA, it transformed a neighborhood. Let's rewind for a second. Before all this, Emerald Shores was your typical HOA-ruled suburb. People whispered behind closed doors. Neighbors avoided eye contact, afraid that chatting too long in their front yard would earn them a violation for unsightly gatherings. Barbecues? Forget about it. Folks barely waved at each other, too busy double-checking if their mailbox paint was approved beige instead of illegal taupe. The HOA didn't unite them. It divided them. But once Garrett exposed the rot, something incredible happened. People started talking. For the first time in years, neighbors who only knew each other as the guy with the lawn flamingos or the lady with the Christmas lights started sharing stories.
They realized they'd all been bullied, all been targeted, all been paying into a system designed to exploit them. And suddenly, instead of living in fear, they had something powerful: solidarity. It started small. Betty, the gnome queen, hosted coffee mornings on her porch. Frank, the retired firefighter, set up a weekly poker game in his garage. Maria organized a community potluck where everyone brought dishes so diverse it looked like a Food Network competition. And of course, Garrett, though never seeking the spotlight, was always there, calm, steady, the man who'd sparked it all. The lake, once patrolled by HOA rules like no fishing and no swimming without board approval, became the beating heart of the neighborhood. Families gathered there for bonfires, kids splashed in the shallows, fishermen cast their lines without worrying about citation slips. The same shoreline that had been ground zero for Garrett's feud with Darlene was now a place of laughter, relaxation, and community. The biggest change, though, was cultural. Emerald Shores stopped being a place policed by clipboards and fines and became a place where neighbors actually looked out for each other. If someone's yard was overgrown, neighbors pitched in to mow. If a roof needed patching, Frank grabbed his ladder and others followed. No more anonymous violation letters, just genuine help, freely given. Garrett's story spread beyond Emerald Shores, too. Nearby neighborhoods heard about the boat guy who froze the HOA's bank accounts, and it became legend. Some saw it as a cautionary tale, others as inspiration. Either way, it marked a turning point, proof that HOA tyranny could be defeated, not with fists, but with facts, persistence, and community spirit. And the best part, Garrett never claimed the spotlight. He didn't run for president of the new board. He didn't demand recognition. He simply kept showing up, line in the water, calm as ever. His fight wasn't about glory. It was about freedom, for himself, for his neighbors, and for anyone tired of pastel blazer tyranny. So fact number 9 isn't just about victory. It's about transformation. A neighborhood that once tiptoed in fear was now thriving in fellowship. And all it took was one man refusing to be intimidated even when they torched the thing he loved most. And if you think Garrett's quiet victory was the perfect ending, hold tight, because the real finale wasn't about boats or bank accounts. It was about sending a message. Welcome to fact number 10, the legacy of burning the HOA to the ground. Every great story has a finale, and in the saga of Garrett Holloway versus the Emerald Shores HOA, the ending wasn't just sweet, it was symbolic. This wasn't just one man standing up to one corrupt board. This was a story about what happens when bullies are exposed, when neighbors unite, and when intimidation tactics boomerang back with devastating force. Let's start with Garrett himself. For years, the Horizon Runner had been his anchor, his connection to his late father, his peace on the water, his legacy. When it was torched, the HOA thought they'd broken him, but what they actually did was transform him into something more dangerous than they could ever imagine. A man with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Garrett didn't rebuild his boat, he rebuilt his community. And that legacy will float longer than any vessel ever could. The HOA? They didn't just lose, they imploded. Their money frozen, their fraud exposed, their insurance gutted, their reputation torched harder than Garrett's boat. Darlene, once queen of the cul-de-sac, became the punchline of neighborhood jokes. Flyers, lawsuits, intimidation, all of it backfired, leaving her as nothing more than a bitter footnote in the history of Emerald Shores. But the legacy of this war wasn't about Darlene. It was about what came after. Emerald Shores became a symbol, a living, breathing example that HOA power isn't absolute and that ordinary people can stand up, push back, and reclaim their neighborhoods. For residents, the message was clear. Community doesn't come from fines and bylaws. It comes from bonfires by the lake, poker games in the garage, neighbors sharing ladders and casseroles. The story spread, too. Local news ran with it, turning Garrett into a kind of folk hero. Online forums buzzed about the boat guy who froze the HOA. Other homeowners watched, inspired. realizing they weren't as powerless as they'd been led to believe. Some even used Garrett's playbook, auditing financials, freezing accounts, exposing fraud. Slowly but surely, his fight became more than a story, it became a strategy. And here's the most ironic part of all. Darling's obsession with protecting property values ended up doing the exact opposite. Under her reign, fear and resentment dragged the neighborhood down. After she fell, property values soared. Not because of HOA rules, but because people actually wanted to live there. Turns out buyers prefer communities with laughter and freedom, not pastel dictatorships with laminated fines. Garrett never asked to be a hero. He just wanted to fish off his dock, honor his father's memory, and live in peace. But when his peace was burned, he chose to fight. Not with fists, but with facts, patience, and persistence. And that choice didn't just save him, it saved his community. So fact number 10 isn't about a boat or a bank account, it's about legacy. The legacy of a man who proved that HOA bullies can be beaten, that intimidation can be exposed, and that community spirit is stronger than any rulebook. Garrett's Horizon Runner may be gone, but his fight sails on, carried in every neighbor who now knows their voice matters, their rights matter, and their freedom is worth defending. Because at the end of the day, the true victory wasn't just shutting down the HOA. The true victory was proving that no matter how hard they try to intimidate you, no matter how many rules they throw at you, no matter how many fires they light, you can rise from the ashes stronger than ever.